Welcome to Boys in the Hood TV. Today we're tapping into the streets of Chicago, and we're going to be looking at one of the deadliest wars between the Satan disciples and the almighty saints. But we're going to be looking at one member in particular from the Satan disciples, and that's Christian Gonzalez, aka Babyface, a Satan disciple who is currently facing first-degree murder and attempted murder charges. One other charges coming from beating a man to death in a county jail for 10 minutes straight with a sock full of bars of soap. Now, Satan disciples, aka SDs, have been active in the city of Chicago since the 60s, originating on North Lawndale near 15th and Tallman. But over the years, they would invade different sections, going to war with different rival gangs. Rivals like the Latin Kings, the Latin Saints, Gangster 2-6, and others. Now, the Almighty Saints, or the Saints, were also founded around the same time as the SDs in the 60s. Now, the Almighty Saints originated in the backyard section of New City on 45th and Wood. Now, the war between the Satan disciples and the Almighty Saints began in the 70s, but the war would really kick off in the 80s when the SDs began to expand and move into the backyard neighborhood on 51st and Wood, which is only a few blocks away from the Almighty Saints stronghold area around 45th. Now, SDs would call this area Terror Town. After establishing themselves in this area, the backyard neighborhood became a war zone between multiple gangs. But this bloodshed didn't stop in the 70s or the 80s. It continued into the 90s. In the summer of 1993, Satan disciples would expand once again, this time moving into 59th and Spalding area, which will be known as S Block. And at the time, there were members of the Almighty Saints living in this area, a house on Spalding and another on Trumbull. Of course, once the SDs found this out, this would lead to them shooting up the homes and even setting fire to them also. The war would continue all the way through the 90s and even hit in the 2000s. Now, once the 2000s actually hit, we would see a new generation of SDs emerge from S Block, which included one of the most ruthless members being Christian Gonzalez, aka Babyface. Now, Gonzalez had joined the SDs in his teens and slowly began building a violent reputation in the streets that would eventually lead to murder. Now, in June of 2017, Gonzalez would be in the area of the 4400 block of Southwood. At around 4:40 p.m., he would spot a 23-year-old Almighty Saint riding in the area. Gonzalez, armed with a rifle, would step out the car and run up on the man and open fire. Gonzalez would shoot the man multiple times, one shot in his left leg and then in the back. Immediately, Gonzalez would flee the scene. Although critically wounded, the man was able to drive himself to Strugger-Holder Hospital, where he would be listed in critical condition. Now, ultimately, this Almighty Saint gang member would survive this attack. Now, for nearly 2 years, Christian Gonzalez was able to avoid being arrested for this shooting. But on June 2nd of 2019, he would be charged with attempted murder. And officially, he will be booked into Cook County until his trial. Gonzalez will be placed in Division 9 area, which was a maximum security wing. But only after being in jail for 5 months, Gonzalez will be hit with more charges, which included attempted murder, aggravated battery, and mob action. Gonzalez and 4 other men were seen on surveillance footage in a day room stomping and kicking a 41-year-old man as he laid on the ground. But not only was this man beaten, he was also stabbed with a shank. This beating would go on for nearly 7 minutes before guards arrived and stopped the attack. But even with all these new charges, this would not stop Gonzalez from living up to his gang's name, Satan Disciple. Just 2 months later, a new arrival would show up at Cook County. 19-year-old Almighty Saint member, Pedro Ruiz, who was charged with attempted murder and aggravated battery with a firearm. Now, Pedro was accused of shooting a man after an argument on the 1800 block of West 47th Street. Now, only 2 days after being booked, Pedro will be placed in Division 9, the same exact security wing that Gonzalez was in. But not only was Pedro placed in the same exact wing, he was placed in the same exact cell with Gonzalez. Now, this choice by the guards to place an almighty saint in the same cell with a Satan disciple was probably one of the most idiotic choices to make. While sitting in the cell, SD member Gonzalez would take one of his socks and place multiple bars of soap inside of it. And within 30 minutes, Gonzalez would attack Pedro. He would brutally beat him with that sock-filled soap, striking him multiple times in the head, knocking him to the ground. Now, this attack would last for at least 10 minutes until Pedro stopped breathing. At around 1:27 a.m., as an officer walked by, Gonzalez would yell to the guard that something was wrong with his cellmate and that he was not breathing. The officer would see Pedro sitting against the wall and immediately call for backup. 3 more guards would show up, and as they entered into the cell, they would see a pool of blood and clear signs of head trauma. Gonzalez was immediately removed from the cell and handcuffed and isolated in another cell. Officers would then radio in for medical help and begin to perform life-saving measures until the ambulance arrived. At around 2 a.m., an ambulance would finally arrive, but it would not be until 2:30 until the ambulance would actually leave the jail to head to the hospital. At around 2:56 a.m., Pedro Ruiz would be pronounced dead. In the upcoming days, Gonzalez would be charged with first-degree murder for the death of Pedro.
Sources with knowledge of the incident say an officer was doing a security check on the area where Pedro Ruiz and Christian Gonzalez were cellmates on the morning of February 1st. When the officer got near their cell, Gonzalez said to the officer, "Something is wrong with my cellmate." An officer started chest compressions on Ruiz. 911 was called. An officer got a defibrillator. It was used on Ruiz while several officers continued chest compressions. When paramedics arrived, they took over the chest compressions. Ruiz was then put on a gurney and taken to Mount Sinai Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. Illinois County jail standards state gang activity must be considered when an inmate is assigned to their cell.
Now, in the upcoming weeks, Pedro's mother will file a lawsuit for wrongful death against Cook County. That officials knew that by placing Pedro into the same cell as a rival gang member will result in violence. Now, the sheriffs will respond by saying, "We're doing an internal investigation, which is underway and looking into all factors involved in this tragic death."
And we asked why Ruiz and Gonzalez were assigned to the same cell if they were members of different gangs. The sheriff's office told us homicides in the jail are rare. The last one took place more than 5 years ago. The office has launched a thorough internal review of all the factors involved in this case.
As of right now, Satan disciple member Christian Gonzalez faces first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder along with aggravated battery. Gonzalez's next court date is December 15th. I would like to thank everybody for tapping in, and I'll see y'all next time.